Thanks so much, Carol. It's great to see everyone this morning, and I understand that we're kind of interrupting the normal chat, and that some people are disappointed that we won't be able to have the discussion around the sermon. But we did want to make sure that as many people as possible would be able to join for this presentation. We're ready to move forward on the building. It's really exciting. A lot of people have been working really hard in the background over the last year since we approved moving forward and starting the process. And we did at that time promise that we would come back for a final vote on what the actual project looked like, as well as a vote for using the endowment to fund part of it. And that vote is now just 2 weeks away. And we just wanted to make sure that we had a chance to present what the project looks like at this point, what it's going to entail, what we're going to get out of it, what the total cost is, et cetera. Give everybody a chance to ask questions over the next 2 weeks. So we're going to make this presentation available. We're going to have an email address that people can send questions to. Next Sunday, we'll also have a Q&A period. But for some reasons that I'll get into later in the presentation, we actually have to move relatively quickly on this in order to get the construction done kind of in the next building season. And so it's really important that we look at this carefully, we think about it, but we also move forward with all deliberate speed. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. Let's see. So, as hopefully everybody knows, last year, about this time, a little bit earlier, we had the presentation from David Torrey where we talked about the entire building project, what we wanted to get out of it, how it was going to transform, our building, our space, the way that we can interact with the community, et cetera. And when we move forward with that, there was still a lot of open questions. We hadn't, we had the general plan, but we really didn't know what it was going to involve in detail. We didn't know how, the community was going to respond. We hadn't yet gotten permission from the Cambridge Historical Society. There were still a lot of things to do, but we had to make a commitment to move forward with it and spend time and money to really investigate and lay the groundwork for the project. And over the last year, we've had many people, many different teams working on that and different aspects of it, from looking at the designs to looking at community interaction and raising money. Just there's been a tremendous amount that's gone on kind of nonstop for the last year. And we've wound up at a place that I think is really exciting. We're actually going to get a lot more out of the project a lot sooner than we originally anticipated, which is also really exciting. And so I just want to go through kind of the whole thing and let everyone see where we are and where we've come from. So if we go back, let's see, we go back through the history starting from about a year ago. I'm just gonna, if you haven't been reading all of the building updates and newsletters and everything that's kind of come out over the last year, if you want a quick recap, I'm just going to lay out where we've been over the last year. So back in last September, we presented the project as created by David Torrey to the congregation, and we got a very enthusiastic response. People were very excited at the building and the space and what our plans were. But we did also have a surprise that the project was going to cost over twice what we thought it was when we started it at the planning at the beginning. And so there was that to grapple with as well, but we made the commitment to move forward anyways and figure out how we could make it work. We went ahead and voted kind of in early November and agreed to move forward and gave the board the ability to start hiring consultants, start spending money, and start really doing some detailed planning and design work for the project. Over the next month or so, up through the end of the year, we formed several teams around it, the project management team, and we had the building team and the development team working on the design and on financing it. And we also hired a grant writer to help us through the process of raising outside money, someone that we really felt could point us in the right direction in terms of grants that we might not even be aware of were out there, and then properly writing them up and doing, creating the materials for it and the right sales pitch. And so Tracy Sopchak was brought on board at the beginning of the year, and we've had a great working relationship with her, and she's really helped us quite a lot through this process. And kind of at the beginning of the year, that's when we started. We created a list of all the potential grants out there, and then prioritized them and started, sending out or putting together all of the information that we need to apply for the different grants. And figuring out what the schedule was for how to tackle each one so that we could get the most value out of each attempt. Grant writing is a very uncertain process, so we knew that we weren't going to hit everything every time, but we really needed to get in. And a lot of these you have to apply for multiple times before you get it, so we really need to start the process right away. Then early in the year, when we really looked at how we were going to work through the project, both from the financing point of view and also just construction, we wound up breaking it up into 3 separate phases. And we thought that those might occur in successive years. So we're going to have the first year really work on doing the interior and all of the interior prep work that needed to be done, electrical, plumbing, kind of reframing the front door, things like that were going to affect both the interior and exterior, and that we couldn't start the exterior work without doing. And then the next year, we're hoping to do the exterior facade work, and that's where we'd put up the scaffolding and do everything on the tower and the steeple and all of the work that required the scaffolding, which would be in place for the majority of the year. And then the third phase, the year after that, we hope to do all of the landscaping, building the ramp, moving the stairs, the park-like area, fountain, etc., kind of all the ground level finishing work. And so that's how we conceptualized moving forward with the project. And each one of those would give us a separate time to raise money for each part of the project. And if anything, if we fell behind on our fundraising, it also gave us points where we could stop and wait till our fundraising efforts caught up with where we needed to be. So once we did that, we submitted the plans to Cambridge Historical Commission. We were on their docket for several meetings in a row and kind of went back and forth, and finally got approval for the design early in the year. And in fact, it was unanimous and very enthusiastic support from the Historical Commission. They really liked what we were doing and really wanted to see us succeed and move forward with it. So that was great. We also at the same time started talking with the Harvard Square Business Association and other neighbors about the project as well. Once we got approval, that meant we could really start with the full planning. And since we knew we were going to do it in phases, we could break out phase 1 part and start putting together the exact, what exactly needed to happen in that, what the costs were going to be, what work we were going to include in each section, with the ultimate goal of creating all of the drawings and bid documents so that we could send it out to contractors and get bids back on the construction. And at the same time that we were doing that, we're also working on fundraising materials, creating fundraising brochures, creating a network of contacts, working on some of the back end, computer database work that we need to do in order to set up, a way of tracking fundraising, tracking who we'd contacted, who was going to ask, what organizations or individuals outside, et cetera. So there's kind of a lot of behind the scenes prep work for the fundraising, as well as working on the materials and documents, coming up with the story that we're going to tell, et cetera. So after a couple of months, we were able to get through all of the engineering and drawing and groundwork for creating the bid documents. And finally, in the summer, we were able to send out bid proposals. I believe we sent out to 6 different contractors in order to get a nice variety of bids back. We certainly wanted to do at least 3, but we want to do more than that and just see what we could get and what things were going to look like. So we sent out 6 bids. And then also in the summer, in August, we got approval from the Cambridge Historical Society for a $100,000 grant towards the project, which is the maximum award that they will give in any single year. They do give those in multiple years, and if they like the project, they will fund it for multiple years as well. So we're hoping that as we move forward with this, we can get that same $100,000 at least one more time, possibly beyond that. But we did receive the grant in August from the Historical Society. So towards the end of the summer, we got our bids back, and it turns out that 2 of the companies chose not to bid, and we got 4 bids. And those bids came back between $1.4 and $2 million for the work. Our original cost estimation had us spending about $800,000 on phase 1. So this came as quite a bit of a surprise to us. We kind of got the set of bids and we're like, whoa, okay, we need to think about this, because it was a much higher price tag than we were thinking we were going to have to pay for phase 1, which kind of throws off all of the planning for all of the phases and the fundraising. So we went back and actually had meetings with each of the bidders, discussed in detail, what went into the proposal, why the costs were what they were. We had our cost estimator, who is a professional firm that does construction cost estimating, go back and look at the bids as well and see if they felt like they were reasonable. And it turns out there's, I'll go into more detail, but the verdict was that the bids were reasonable for the work that we wanted done. And that if we wanted to proceed with phase 1, that was going to be roughly the price tag that we were going to have to pay. So that caused us to take a step back and look at what we were trying to accomplish in phase 1, what kind of goals we were going to achieve at the end of it, where we were going to be in a position for fundraising. And so we decided to kind of rework exactly what we wanted to go into phase 1, so that if we were going to spend significantly more money than we thought we were originally going to, that we would get more out of it as well. And by kind of shuffling around what we were doing between phases, we thought that it might be possible that if we were going to have to spend $1.5 to $2 million, that we could get more out of it than just the initial prep work for subsequent phases. So that at the end of it, we would actually have something to show for that amount of money and time spent. So another important milestone was just this past week, we got approval from the investment committee to use endowment funds for this project. And that's one of the requirements for going to the congregation for a vote, is to get the investment committee's support behind the specific proposal. And so when we do have the meeting in 2 weeks for using endowment funds, that comes with the investment committee's endorsement of the plan. And now we are at this meeting where we are describing the plan to the congregation, letting you all know what's involved and what we're going to do and what the cost and the scope of the project is. And then finally, in mid-November, we're going to have a vote whether or not to actually adopt this plan, spend the money from the endowment, and proceed. So that's kind of the timeline of what's been done over the past year in summary. So the big question is, why were the bids so much higher than they were, than our estimation? When we went into it, we thought we were going to be spending less than $1 million on phase 1, and it was primarily just going to be prep work for doing the major portions of the project. But it came out to be twice that. And there's a number of reasons for that. One of it is that during the planning process, we actually wound up adding in a number of expensive elements that weren't part of the original phase 1 plan. For instance, we put in a sprinkler system, or we put in a plan to put a sprinkler system throughout the meeting house. This was in response to a requirement from the city of Cambridge. When we started the project, we were originally told that we wouldn't have to put in a sprinkler system. But after looking at it in more detail, they came back and said, no, actually you do. And if you're going to do the sprinkler system, it also requires a whole new alarm system and all of the other fire protection and suppression that goes along with that. So that wound up being a pretty significant addition to the project. However, it's an addition that came up in our initial discussions and that many congregants said they would like to see, and ultimately is something that we want for the building in order to preserve it going forward. So while it's a cost we weren't anticipating, it's entirely reasonable and something that we would really like to see anyways. We also had additional ceiling issues with plaster falling as we had in previous years. And so again, when we're looking at how to cost effectively deal with this problem, we didn't want to just patch up that part of the ceiling when we were going to go in and do major renovations as well. So we decided that it made sense just to deal with the situation once and for all, take down the plaster, put up drywall instead, and just not have to deal with this in the future anymore. But that's also another significant additional cost that was not part of the original plan. And then of course there's the, another thing that we wound up having to do is moving the back wall of the meeting house slightly in order to allow enough room within the narthex for accessibility. As you know, some of the areas, especially around the side stairs, are quite tight. And we also needed a certain amount of room for the central ramp that comes up to the level of the inside of the meeting house. And in order to make all of that work, we actually need to move the back wall of the meeting house, not by a tremendous amount, but moving the wall is a pretty significant thing that we weren't originally counting on. So if you add those in together with just general COVID conditions of everything costing significantly more, lumber prices have gone up through the roof, labor costs are much higher, excuse me. And so just when you add all of that together, it really comes out making sense that the bids came in where they did. And this was what our cost estimator told us as well, is that when you look at the pieces that were included and then you look at the current conditions, kind of they came in at a pretty reasonable range. So if we want to move forward, that's the kind of money we're going to have to spend. So that kind of made us stop and say, all right, well, what do we do at this point? And we basically had three different options. We could either continue with the project as it was. We could pause the project and hope that conditions improved, or we could change what we were planning to do. If we delayed the project, that might mean that we would see lower prices after COVID is finished, but we don't know when that's going to be finished. And we haven't really seen a lot of indication that prices as a whole are coming down. Prices of some things like lumber have come down a little bit. Other things are continuing to go up. And we felt that delaying the project really, the chance that it would gain us a cost benefit was fairly low, and the chance that it might wind up being an indefinite delay as we continued to wait for things to get better was quite high. And we didn't want to lose all the momentum and energy and effort that had already been put into it up at this point. If we went with our initial plan, that had a couple of problems. One is because of the sprinkler issue, we couldn't move forward with exactly what we had planned. And if we just tried to do everything else exactly like we had, and adding the sprinklers as well, we wouldn't really get a lot out of it at the end of the day. And we would have to come back in again and deal with the ceiling issue and other things. So we didn't really think that our original plan worked in the current environment. So that really left us with the option to modify the plan and see what we could do that still came in within the same price range. And so that's what we went back and really tried to figure out how we could achieve as many of our goals as possible, as soon as possible, within the budget for phase one that we had. And one of the, but it would mean that we would be spending significantly more money than we had planned. And since we're spending it on the interior of the building, we're not going to be able to get a lot of the grants for historical preservation and kind of a lot of the donations from the community that are that have to do with the exterior of the building and people's excitement to see that change. Really, when we're doing the interior work, nobody but us is particularly interested in that. And so we are going to pretty much have to fund that amount ourselves. So we had to figure out how to make that work as well. So when we went back and looked at how we could change things, this was the key points that we wanted to do and make phase one different from what we originally planned. First was to add the sprinkler system and upgrade the fire alarm, which we had to do anyways because of city requirements. We wanted to make sure that the plaster ceiling issues were permanently fixed and we wouldn't have to close down anymore for falling ceiling problems. We wanted to make sure that all the prep work that was done for future phases was still done on the interior space. And we wanted to make sure that anything that was at risk, such as the organ, is protected from the environment in the time between when we finish phase one and when we're able to do phase two to secure the envelope. We also wanted to make sure that rather than waiting until phase three to have the ramp constructed, if we were going to do all of this interior work to allow for accessibility, then we wanted to make sure that the building was accessible right away. And so we want a temporary ramp, but when we say temporary, it would not be just made out of plywood and something ugly that would be torn down right away, but it would be a nice wooden ramp which could last a number of years if necessary while we work on raising the funds and doing the subsequent phases. And then when we finally have the stone ramp constructed, we can get rid of the wooden one. But we wanted to make the meeting house accessible right away. And finally, this was a big part of it, was to go ahead and remove the pews from the interior of the meeting house, something that we've talked about before. But when we looked at everything that needed to be done, it told us that if we were ever going to do that, if we were ever going to make that change, now would be the time to do it. Because there's a lot of interior work that needs to be done, especially with the ceiling work and the sprinkler system, that would necessitate working around the pews and protecting the pews and trying to cover them. Whereas if we could remove them during the construction phase, that actually makes the interior construction easier, it's more cost effective. We can also recarpet, make the interior nicer, and then come back in with an actual accessible, useful space. And one of the issues that we found is that even if we created a ramp from the front and we have the ability for anyone to enter in through the front doors, anyone and everyone coming in together through the front of the building, which is what we had always planned, once you get into the meeting house, that space itself is not very accessible. It's very limiting where you can go. It's very limiting in terms of how you use it and how anyone with accessibility issues can move around within the space. And so if we were ever going to take out the pews, now is the time to do it as part of this project. It just makes the most sense and will be the cheapest time to do it that we would ever have. So at the end of phase one, this is what we see as our vision for the building, that we will have an accessible and inviting front entrance, and no longer will be reliant on the temperamental elevator in order to get anyone and everyone inside the building. Everyone can come in right through the front. We'll have a more spacious and functional narthex with additional storage and also some little areas for meetings if we want. We'll have significant improvement to fire safety, both prevention, suppression, and entrance and egress from the building. We'll have no more issues with the ceiling falling down on us and necessitating us closing the meeting house until we can get that fixed. We'll have a much more useful and flexible main meeting area that will help both us and also the community. There are many people that have wanted to use the space but are not able to because of the pews. And now it will be a space that anyone would be able to use for a much wider range of events. That also means that the meeting house will become much more desirable for a rental and event space, which means that we'll both get more money and also more exposure and attention from the community. We'll have all of the vital interior elements will be protected from any of the environmental damage that the poor envelope of the building has been causing. And we'll also have, especially with the temporary ramp out front, it will be obvious that we are working on the building, and the building is a work in progress, which we feel will actually aid us with generating excitement in the community and fundraising for the future phases of the project. And finally, it also gives us a way that if we needed to pause after phase one, because we don't have the funds to continue, we will actually have a nice functional space, which we wouldn't need to do anything to immediately in order to really enjoy and to make much better use of than we currently can. So it gives us a very good endpoint where we can stop and raise additional funds as necessary. Here's just some drawings that show you, I know that I've talked about moving the wall and what the entrance looks like. So I just want to give everyone a chance to see. If you look at the drawing on the left is the current narthex and back of the meeting house. And the drawing on the right is with the new, with the moved wall. You can see we've added kind of a curve to it. We've added additional closet storage along the wings. There's just it feels more open and spacious. There's also the niches on either side of the central door that can be used for tables or other displays. Just is a generally nicer, more open and functional space than what we have now. We get rid of the double airlock doors. We have one main front door. One thing I do want to mention is that on the drawing on the right, you'll see that the exterior includes the landscaping and stuff that we will see in phase 3. That portion will not be done in phase 1, but we will have a temporary wooden ramp there. So it will be accessible. It just won't necessarily look exactly as shown in the drawing to the right. But this is kind of what the space will look like. And so now the big question, how do we pay for it? Since this is much more expensive than we originally thought, how are we going to finance this, and can we finance it on our own? So when we went back and looked at the original way that we thought we were going to finance the project, we were going to be taking about $1.1 million from the endowment as part of the original plan. And so if we look at that original contribution, and then we add in the cost of vital improvements that were not part of the building plan, but that we would have to do anyways before we can use the space, the sprinklers and the ceiling repair pretty much have to be done before we can do any other kind of renovation. Ceiling repair has to be done before we can even use the building again. And the sprinklers will have to be put in as part of anything that we do as per the city. And so we felt, since those were items that really have to do with the functionality and the protection of the space, that it would be okay to take additional money from the endowment for those particular items, which is around $400,000. Then we have the Historic Commission grant of $100,000, and the Special Gifts Group has already raised about $240,000 from within the congregation towards the building, and we're hoping that we can get that up to $300,000 total. So that gives us a total of about 1.9 million budget for the entire project. And if we go back and look at our bids, the bid from the firm that we liked the most and we felt was actually the second lowest bid, as well as bringing the best experience, the best size for the project, and the best fit with us as well. Their bid for the work that we proposed, that for most of this work, was $1,559,000. There's a little bit of additional work, like removing the pews, that we did not originally ask them to bid on. We're estimating that the additional work is probably about $200,000 worth. And so if you subtract that from our budget, that leaves us with a margin of almost $1.5 million. So we feel fairly comfortable that we would be able to move forward with this as is, assuming that we get a vote from the congregation to use $1.5 million from the endowment to do it. And then finally, this is the schedule that we would see. We are actually operating on a pretty compressed schedule, because the bidder that we would like to use has a significant $50 million project coming up in the summer. And so if we are not able to engage them and have them start work pretty soon, then we'll lose the ability to use them at all. And we would have to send the project out to rebid, with the additional work, and just try to find other contractors to do it. But if we want to move forward with the firm that we prefer, we need to move pretty quickly, which is why we have this compressed time frame. So we have this informational meeting, and then over the next 2 weeks, we'll have opportunities for people to ask questions, both via email or in conversation next week at the service time. But once we have the next 2 weeks of discussion, then we'll have the vote. Assuming the vote goes thumbs up, then we will immediately inform our preferred contractor that we want to start, which will mean that they can start selecting their subcontractors and start pulling the permits, etc. And so that can happen towards the end of this year, up through December. We also, as I had mentioned, if we're going to be removing the pews, we need to decide exactly what we want to do as a congregation to replace it. Currently, the plan does not specify what we do put in the space, because we feel like that's something that we can't decide on without significant additional congregational input. And so through the months of December, January, and February, we can work as a congregation to decide what we want that interior space to look like. And we've already got some ideas down on paper, and that we can present as soon as we decide to move forward. And then we can have a process for soliciting input and having discussion and really making sure that we do the right thing with the space. So that process will begin in December. And then as we move forward, we're hoping that by February, we've got to the point where we know what the design will be. We've got the permits, we've got the subcontractors and material lined up, and we can start construction. And construction, we believe, will last from February through till May. And then at the end of that, we will be able to move in. And that's kind of which means that compared to the original plan, we will actually wind up with a much more functional space much sooner than we thought going into this. So even though it was not a welcome surprise that we wound up having such increased cost, it really made us go back and think about our priorities and figure out how we can get the most for our money as soon as we can so that we can start using and enjoying the space. And that's where we are. And so at this point, I would like to open it up for any questions that people have. You can ask me, you can ask we have a number of the members of the project management team and building team and development team here. And I'm sure lots of people will be able to chime in. But that's the end of the presentation. And let me know what you need to know in order to be able to make a decision. And I don't know, Carol, if you can call out people that have hands up or whatever, I can only see a few.
Tricia? Yes. I think I know the answer to this, but in case lumber suddenly goes down, there's a glut of lumber on the market or something like that. Is there any way that we can benefit from a lower cost of that in the, in our bid, work that into the bid? I mean, I just don't know what the situation's going to be. I think once people get used to the nice price, I mean, the suppliers, it's gonna stay there, but there could be a glut.
Right. The bid that we have, has contingencies built in for material cost, and we haven't purchased the material yet. And when that happens, then we will do it at whatever market rate is at the time. So that really is the general contractor's best prediction as to what the cost will be. So if we decide to move forward, we're not locking in any particular price right now. It'll just be what the cost is at the time that we need to buy it.
Okay. And then the other thing is the cost of replacement seating, factored into your prices? When we take the pews out, yeah.
Right. It will depend on how fancy we want to go with that. The 200,000 does include some form of seating, but it's also, we may want to do something like have everyone buy a chair as a fundraiser kind of thing that has been suggested and has been done in other congregations. So that's part of the process that we will go through, kind of between now and February. We'll see how much money we have available and what we want to do with that in order to make the space. There's also the questions of, do we want them to stack, and do we want storage in the room? So there's really a lot to work through.
Sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mike.
Hi. So I just wanted to ask, as I haven't been keeping track of the endowment for some time, given prices have gone up, obviously, but also the market has gone up considerably, can you give us any concept of what percentage of the endowment we're talking about taking out, and can you give us any comfort about that based on how the endowment has grown relative to 4 or 5 years ago when we started thinking about this project?
Right. So the amount that we're taking out is at the current market rate is somewhere around 15 to 17% of the endowment. So it's noticeable, but not huge. The endowment is over 10 million now. We also, we take out a 4.5% every year to fund the operating budget. And last year we put a pause on increases. So the endowment has been going up year on year for a while now. And we actually last year in the budget froze the amount that the endowment would contribute in anticipation that we might be doing a disbursement. And so at this point, if we were to take the $1.5 million out of the endowment, we would not need to see any drop in what we get year on year for our operating expenses. It will basically stay flat with where it is now. That was kind of the goal. was so that we would be able to take out a chunk and not have it impact the operating budget too much. So right now, we're taking out about 4.2% because we're kind of undertaking. And after the disbursement, we'll wind up taking about 4.7%. And we consider anything between 4 and 5 to be a reasonable rate, kind of for long term. So it shouldn't impact us too much, and it will leave the endowment still in a pretty healthy place. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great news to hear. I think that allays a lot of concerns, I would hope, for a lot of people in the congregation.
Grace?
Grace, you're muted.
Okay, yeah, yes, I know that. My question was, you mentioned possible storage. Would that be planned afterwards? I sort of think, I mean, you're talking about 2 little rooms in the back there, but I would think if you're going to have a storage space, couldn't it be the area that you were talking about for one of the rooms rather than decreasing the size of the parish hall? I realize that may be something to be discussed, but I was thinking before walls are actually put in place, maybe considering that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one reason we want to decide on what we're going to do before construction starts, so that we can make sure to properly put all that in. We've actually already got several suggestions from David Torrey. He's taken a look at the interior and come back with a few ideas as to what we might do, both with and without storage. And so that's some of the stuff that we'll be able to present, kind of once we decide to move forward. We already have a few drawings of that. There's one of the questions is whether or not we want to leave the boxes along the side or take those out. There's definitely pros and cons to both of those. If we did take the boxes out, we may use some of that space as closets for where the chairs go in, so that it's easier to get them in and out of the main space. But there are a number of options, and we can't even really say how much storage we need without knowing what kind of seating we're going to choose to go in. So there's a lot of work on that before we really come up with the final design.
Hi, I wanted to jump in at this point because for 2 reasons. One is, to me, the most exciting part of this entire phase takes place when we as a congregation re-visualize the interior of the meeting house. This has been done 3 times in the history of this building. The configuration and appearance of the meeting house has been changed 3 times. So now it's our turn. And one of the things that I just love about this new, iteration of phase 1 is that as a congregation, I think we are going to have a lot of fun reimagining what this meeting house is and should be for us, the congregation as we now are, and as we envision ourselves for the future. One of the things that is, I've always thought, since the first time I walked in the meeting house, is there is nothing about that space that says Unitarian Universalism. And I really would hope that in the process of having this good time, imagining the interior, that we would come up with a way to tell each other, visitors, and travelers from around the world what this building really is, not what it looks like, but what it really is and what our values are. So that's just, I can't wait for that. The other thing I just wanted to mention that I was impressed about the bidder that we're considering is that it is a real woman-owned business, not just a straw, not just a sham. It's a real woman-owned business. A woman runs this business.
Good.
Laura?
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thanks so much to the project team for prioritizing accessibility. I'm just so thrilled. And I'm curious whether what the floor of the meeting house will look like is part of this design process, because Katie mentioned something about carpeting. I grew up in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, Unitarian Society of Ridgewood, New Jersey, that had hardwood floor in our sanctuary and chairs that were like padded, comfortable, stackable chairs that could be arranged in different configurations. And so I'm thrilled to get rid of the pews and do something more flexible. But I'm wondering if we're definitely doing carpet, or if that's part of the what needs to be discussed.
Great, that's a great question. Certainly the stackable chairs is something that I think most of us on the project management team are thinking along those lines. Excuse me. The carpeting is a little bit more tricky because there are a number of issues with the floor itself and the leveling of the floor. It actually is not terribly flat across the building. That was one of the concerns actually when we started thinking about taking out the pews and we looked at putting the ramps up to the edge. We realized that the different doorways to the sanctuary are at different heights and the floor kind of undulates between them. And we actually went and we did analysis to make sure that the floor could support the weight of like a whole bunch of people all gathered in one space rather than spread out with the pews. And the issues with the floor are many. And at the end of the day, carpeting helps with leveling out and evening out all of that. And so we think that it is most likely that we will wind up with carpeting, just as it hides a lot of sins that the building has and covers up many things. If we wanted to put in hardwood flooring, that would be much more difficult to do and much more expensive. So based on kind of what our priorities are for the money that we have, we're probably going to use carpeting, but that can be part of the discussion as well. But just kind of let you know that's why we're looking at the carpet, is just because of the design of the floor itself and the condition that it's in. That seems to make the most sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Rosalie.
I'm assuming this is not part of the project, is the bathrooms. It's such a great project, but my guess is that that's not part. And I think for large events, maybe there's some, if it's not, maybe there's some way we can be more imaginative about accessing the basement or something.
Yeah, the bathrooms are not part of the current plan. Unfortunately, that adds enough additional costs that it puts it kind of outside of what we can reach right at the moment. But certainly, as we're having the discussion about what the space that looks like on the interior, and as we're raising money from within the congregation for the project, if we're able to raise enough money to include that. The nice thing about the bathrooms is that it's something that can be done as its own piece later. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of the whole thing. But right now that's not part of the plan, but if we found ourselves flush with cash, it could be.
Great, thanks.
Hey, there's a question in the chat as to whether or not we should repair the floor too, if there's a problem with the floor. Because
yeah, that's also a very good question, and it's something that in this process we looked at fairly extensively. The floor is not in bad shape. It's not as though it's going to fall apart. In fact, the floor is quite robust structurally, so it's not really a concern from a safety or durability point of view. It's just that if you can imagine this building, when it was originally built, all of the weight is in the walls, with the big open space in the middle. And so as the building settles, the walls settle down while the middle of the building is supported by the ground, which means that the whole building kind of bows from the walls, then going up towards the center as the building settles. To fix that requires quite a bit of work. You either have to flatten out the floor by putting a new floor on top and making that level, in which case then you raise the level of everything, which means you need a longer handicapped ramp in order to meet code, in order to get up to the new floor height. We can try to flatten out the middle of the floor, but that's actually even more difficult because the whole structure is kind of bowed in that convex shape with the middle pointing up. And we would have to dig down into the floor structure to try to flatten it that way. And even at that, it's not a nice even bow. However, when we did all the measurements, from the center to the different doorways to the different edges, if we look at the actual slope that exists, that meets code for being level. So from a occupational point of view, the floor is considered to be level because it only varies by about 1.5% or so across. But that does mean that the different doorways are at different levels. And so even though the floor is technically level, to make it actually level just involves a tremendous amount of additional work. And since it's already level enough for all occupational purposes, we didn't see any value in spending the money to do that when we could put it into other things. Does that answer the question?
Kate, another question in the chat is, once construction begins, who oversees the work from the church's perspective?
So that's, at this point, that's one of the questions that as we engage the contractor that we have not yet answered, that we intend to, whether or not it's a person within the congregation, a staff, or someone that we hire as an outside consultant to do the monitoring. We have to look at all of those and decide what we think is going to work best for the project. That is not a decision that has been made at this point. We didn't really feel like we could until we knew exactly what the scope of the project was and who we were going to be working with. Once those decisions are remade, then as we start kind of the permitting and planning process, we can also do that as well and figure out what the oversight is going to look like.
Tim has a question.
Yes. I cannot hear Tim.
I'm unmuted.
Now we
I
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm curious to know the prospects for fundraising and for the future phases of the project. Are people optimistic about being able to raise significant amounts from the congregation, and what about from grants or community resources? It seems as though we have, to finish the project, we have quite a bit more money to raise. I'm not sure exactly how much more, but maybe twice as much as what we already are planning to spend. So I'm just curious whether we're ever going to finish the thing.
Right. That's a very good question. And it's definitely something that, we've had, the development team has been meeting, we've been working with our grant writer. We've identified, a fair number of grants, probably $7 million worth, $7 or $8 million worth of grants that we would qualify for and that we feel we have a reasonable chance at. We have applied for some already, and we're told that, yeah, your application looked really great, but with the construction picking up, with COVID winding down, there were actually this past year just a huge flood of requests in for granting organizations, and we were told that we would do much better if we waited till following year to apply, so we weren't in quite that same huge pool. And so there's some that we applied for this year that we didn't get, but we were encouraged to apply for later. There's another tax credit grant from that's from the state, I believe, that is worth $600,000 or $700,000 on its own, and that we think that we have a pretty good shot at. But it seems as though what we've been told by others is that you have to apply for it multiple times to get it right. and they come back with little nitpicks here and there. And that's what happened to us before, is we thought we had done everything correctly, and then they came back and said, well, this wasn't quite right. Try again. And that one comes up every quarter. So we can just keep trying at it until we get it. So there's definitely money out there. We've gotten enthusiastic support from the Harvard Square Business Association. We believe that we're going to be able to get money from some of the businesses around as well that want to see, you know, the square brought back to life to a certain extent. And one of the nice things is that we'll create kind of a space and an excitement around, you know, getting people back into the square, especially if we can use the space for events much more freely than we have. And so there's a lot of enthusiasm within the business community for seeing us do that. So we feel fairly comfortable that we'll be able to raise some money there. There's wealthy individuals in the Cambridge area that are interested in the square and seeing it revitalized. So those are all angles that we're working on, and we feel that the money is out there, but it's just a matter of us putting in the work to go get it. But it definitely will be a significant amount of work. I know that's about the best answer I have. I don't know if anyone else from development wants to chime in on that.
Dave, I'll just mention that it's very helpful for everyone to be thinking about who might be interested in supporting this project in the community, the greater community, because we do feel that there is a great deal of interest in our iconic building and our location, and that many people would want to support this project. So if you have ideas, the special gifts team and the development team would really like to hear from you, because it's our job to go out and talk with these people and ask them for their support, to find out whether or not this is of interest to them, what their values are. These are the kinds of things that are on our agenda for the next few months, to be going out and doing this kind of networking within the congregation and also within the community. We do feel that there is a lot of support out there and that we will be able to be successful. But it is going to take the help and support of everyone in the congregation to make that possible.
Todd,
I was just going to say what Sylvia said, which is we're beginning a process of relational meetings, one-on-one meetings, and developing our network of contacts. And all of you people know people. Maybe you don't know somebody who's got lots of money they're ready to give to First Parish, but you know people who might introduce us. And so we'll encourage you to feed those ideas and leads to the special gifts groups, to Sylvia, to Cushing, to me, and we'll follow up with you on those great ideas. One of the thoughts we had is that there are a lot of grant making bodies out there that don't accept unsolicited grants. They'll approach us, but you might know people who sit on those boards of those foundations and can introduce us and can help us get invited. So that's the kind of networking process that we're going to be doing in the coming months. And yes, working with our grant writing consultant, we have convinced ourselves that the money is out there and that this is fundable.
Mike.
Kate, I have a question about part of the phase one is protecting the organ. So I assume that means doing some sort of work to the exterior of I guess a Band-Aid nature, because phase two is going to be the whole scale, repair and enhancement of the facade. So can you address a little bit how much of phase one is going to have to be spent for that, and how do you align that with phase two in a way that is most cost effective?
So the way that we've actually looked at protecting the organ in the final plan is that there will be a wall between the organ and the exterior. Part of that is, our thinking is we'll put lighting behind the windows in the tower. And that will be kind of just a little like space behind the windows in which we can put lighting so that we can turn those on at night and light up the tower. But the walls will also serve the function of isolating the interior from the exterior. And so that doesn't require the scaffolding. So that's something that can be done strictly interior to the building without as much cost and expense. And then that will act as a barrier that will protect the interior space from the shabby tower wall. And so actually we're thinking we won't need to do any exterior work in order to implement that kind of protection for the organ.
Good.
Linda?
Yes, I posted a question in the chat, but I think we raised this once before, that to spur more interest and hopefully monetary support, are we planning soon, especially if we do indeed get a vote of confidence in November from the congregation to begin the interior work? Can we, I think it might be helpful to have a display in front of the church saying, some kind of positive message. We're going to, coming ahead, and maybe go to our website and learn more. We see that lots of times placed in front of buildings and what have you that are undergoing renovation. People, first of all, the interior work nobody will probably see, but even so, outlining the 3 phases as best we can. I know it might be hard to do because there's so many questions still in the air, but I think letting people know that, oh, look at something is planned here, especially with the condition of the building now, it might be particularly pleasing for people to see that we are indeed we are indeed concerned about the building and we are planning major work. I think that would be great publicity. So
that is something that has come up multiple times in meetings, both with the building and development teams, and just I believe that's something that kind of all of us assume that we're going to do. It's just a matter of we do need to design the sign, figure out exactly what's going to be on it, and that's something that possibly people within the congregation can help with as well. But that's certainly, I think, all of us just kind of are assuming that we will do that. That has always been part of the construction that we've been pretty sure will happen, but it hasn't been as high of a priority until we really get to that point of actually starting the construction.
Maybe a special email appeal to the congregation, calling all artists and graphic artists, help us with it, to drum up some support. Again,
that sounds like a fine idea to me.
Yeah.
Grace?
Carolyn mentioned it in the chat, but I'll also say it verbally. The quorum for approval is 40%, which is a lot of people, more than we have here today. May I suggest these are the people, most of you are people who come to everything. Could you think of one person in the congregation who you don't often see at these things and give them a personal invitation for next week? It would be sad if we got there and we're 3 members short of a quorum in order to be able to vote for it. And, the people that were there were willing, but we can't take a vote. This could happen.
A registration link for the voting meeting on November 14th will go out this afternoon, along with some other information. So yes, you have to register for that meeting because we need to know who's coming, in part so that we can make sure we have a quorum before the meeting and so that we have the voting list. And so we do need about 60 people. Is 40% of our estimated current membership. I have to do the actual number, but it's about 60. So.
And that's as opposed to about the 40 or so people that we have here.
Right.
Some of whom are not voting members, such as Carol or Mandy or et cetera.
Right.
Right.
Right, it has to be 60 voting members. And if you're unsure of your voting status, please be in touch with me over the next week or so I can let you know. To be a voting member, you have to have made a contribution of record over the past 12 months. Any other questions? I don't think so. Great job, Kate.
Yes, great
So-
job again.
No, it's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to it. I think, like I said, I think this turned out being a good thing because we're going to have a much better space next year than we thought we were going to. So I'm really excited about it, and I hope that we can move forward and do it. Is there anything else that anybody else on the building team or development team or project management team wants to chime in with? I know I spent almost all the time talking and didn't give all of the other people that have put tremendous thought and effort into this a chance to say anything. So I do want to make sure that all of our voices are heard.
You did a wonderful job. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Here,
Kate.
here.
You're here.
Great job, Kate.
Thank you all. So bring friends to vote.
Bring voting friends.
And we will, even though next Sunday is a first Sunday of the month, we will do a special chat at 11 o'clock. If people have any other questions that come up, as you think about it during the week, if you have other questions that come up, we'll do another special chat at 11. And then there is an event on the Common at 12. And I believe a couple of people from the project management team will also be there in case there are questions and you don't get to come onto the chat at 11.
The other reason we recorded today's session was for anyone who, the 20 plus members who were not here that we need to have on the 14th. If they have not been able to see Kate's presentation, Carol is going to be sending out that link to the presentation that will be posted so that they can hear the whole thing and will not have to, be without all the information that's necessary to have a positive vote on the 14th.
Cushing.
I just wanted quickly to acknowledge, in addition to Cade, who has just been so helpful with all of this in terms of his scope and clarity in going forward. Carol has been the heart and soul of moving this forward. And I think one other acknowledgement that's really important is that Reverend Adam came up with this dream and gave it to us. And I honor him for that.
Lois?
Hi, I just was going to ask the question whether there is any contact with Reverend Adam and whether he's going to be apprised. Is he going to be aware of these updates?
As per his request, we have not been in contact with him. The Committee on Ministry is as necessary, but we're not anticipating that he would participate, in this part of the process at all, at least until he is back officially. But I'm sure, he will continue to see, get email updates and see the website.
Okay.
He'll be aware of everything.
Great.
But we won't be, directly involving him in the process.
Oh, yeah, that's not what I meant. I just wanted to make sure that he would know that, because this was his baby, and, so that he could see that changes are coming in the plan. So,
I'm sure he will be aware.
okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. This has been really eye-opening, and I really agree with all the comments that people are making, and very constructive. Thank you so much, especially to Kate and Carol and the committee that's working on this. Thank you.
Anything else? I don't see anyone else with a hand raised, so I think